indicator, which tells him if he's banking, i.e. turning to left or right, and the slip indicator, which tells him if he's skidding crabwise across the sky. 2 of these are electrically operated, and they'd gone the same way as my compass. That left me with the 3 pressure-operated instruments: airspeed indicator, altimeter, and vertical speed indicator. In other words, I knew how fast I was going, how high I was, and if I were diving or climbing. It is perfectly possible to land an aircraft with only these 3 instruments, judging the rest by those old navigational aids, the human eyes. Possible, that is, in conditions of brilliant weather, by daylight, and with no cloud in the sky. It is possible, just possible, though not advisable, to try to navigate a fast-moving jet by dead reckoning, using the eyes, looking down and identifying the curve of the coast where it makes an easily recognizable pattern. Spotting a strange-shaped reservoir, the glint of a river that the map strapped to the thigh says can only be the Ouse or the Trent or the Thames. From lower down, it is possible to differentiate Norwich Cathedral Tower from Lincoln Cathedral Tower, if you know the countryside intimately. By night, it is not possible. The only things that show up at night, even on a bright moonlit night, are the lights. These have patterns when seen from the sky. Manchester looks different from Birmingham. Southampton can be recognized from the shape of its massive harbour and the Solent, cut out in black. The sea shows up black, against the carpet of the city's lights. I knew Norwich very well, and if I could identify the great curving bulge of the Norfolk coastline from Lowestoft round through Yarmouth to Cromer, I could find Norwich, the only major sprawl of lights set 20 miles inland from all points on the coast. 5 miles north of Norwich I knew was the fighter airfield of Merriam St. George, whose red indicator beacon would be blipping out its Morse identification signal into the night. There, if they only had the sense to switch on the airfield lights when they heard me screaming at low level up and down the airfield, I could land safely. I began to let the Vampire down slowly toward the oncoming coast, my mind feverishly working out how far behind schedule I was through the reduced speed. My watch told me 43 minutes airborne. The coast of Norfolk had to be somewhere ahead of my nose, 5 miles below. I glanced up at the full moon, like a searchlight in the glittering sky, and thanked her for her presence. As the fighter slipped toward Norfolk, a sense of loneliness gripped me tighter and tighter. All those things that had seemed so beautiful as I climbed away from the airfield in Lower Saxony now seemed my worst enemies. The stars were no longer impressive in their brilliance. I thought of their hostility, sparkling away there in the timeless, lost infinities of endless space. The night sky, its stratospheric temperature fixed, night and day alike, at an unchanging 56 degrees below zero, became in my mind a limitless prison creaking with the cold. Below me lay the worst of them all, the heavy brutality of the North Sea, waiting to swallow up me and my plane, and bury us for endless eternity in a liquid black crypt where nothing moved, nor would ever move again, and no one would ever know. At 15,000 feet, and still diving, I began to realize that a fresh, and for me the last, enemy had entered the field. There was no ink-black sea 3 miles below me, no necklace of twinkling seaside lights somewhere up ahead. Far away, to right and left, ahead, and no doubt behind me, the light of the moon reflected on a flat and endless sea of white. Perhaps only 100, 200 feet thick, but enough. Enough to blot out all vision. Enough to kill me. The East Anglian fog had moved in. As I had flown westward from Germany, a slight breeze, unforeseen by the weathermen, had sprung up, blowing from the North Sea toward Norfolk. During the previous day, the flat, open ground of East Anglia had been frozen hard by the wind and the sub-zero temperatures. During the evening, the wind had moved a belt of slightly warmer air off the North Sea and onto the plains of East Anglia. There, coming in contact with the ice-cold earth, the trillions of tiny moisture particles in the sea air had vaporized, forming the kind of fog that can blot out 5 counties in a matter of 30 minutes. How far westward it stretched I could not tell. To the West Midlands, perhaps, nudging up against the eastern slopes of the Pennines. There was no question of trying to overfly the fog to the westward. Without navigational aids or radio, I would be lost over strange, unfamiliar country. Also out of the question was to try to fly back to Holland, to land at one of the Dutch Air Force bases along the coast there. I had not the fuel. Relying only on my eyes to guide me, it was a question of landing at Merriam St. George, or dying amid the wreckage of the Vampire somewhere in the fog-wreathed fens of Norfolk. At 10,000 feet, I pulled out of my dive, increasing power slightly to keep myself airborne, using up more of my precious fuel. Still a creature of my training, I recalled again the instructions of Flight Sergeant Norris. When we are totally lost above unbroken cloud, gentlemen, we must consider the necessity of bailing out of our aircraft, must we not? Of course, Sergeant. Unfortunately, the Martin Baker ejector seat cannot be fitted to the single-seat Vampire, which is notorious for being almost impossible to bail out of. The only 2 successful candidates living lost their legs in the process. Still, there has to be a lucky one. What else, Sergeant? Our first move, therefore, is to turn our aircraft toward the open sea, away from all areas of intense human habitation. You mean town, Sergeant? Those people down there pay for us to fly for them, not to drop a screaming monster of 10 tons of steel on top of them on Christmas Eve. There are kids down there, schools, hospitals, homes. You turn your aircraft out to sea. The procedures were all worked out. They did not mention that the chances of a pilot bobbing about on a winter's night in the North Sea, frozen face lashed by a sub-zero wind supported by a yellow life jacket, ice encrusting his lips, eyebrows, ears, his position unknown by the men sipping their Christmas punches in warm rooms 300 miles away, that his chances were less than 1 in 100 of living longer than 1 hour. In the training films, they showed you pictures of happy fellows who would announce by radio that they were ditching, being picked up by helicopters within minutes, and all on a bright, warm summer's day. One last procedure, gentlemen, to be used in extreme emergency. That's better, Sergeant Norris. That's what I'm in now. All aircraft approaching Britain's coasts are visible on the radar scanners of our early warning system. If, therefore, we have lost our radio and cannot transmit our emergency, we try to attract the attention of our radar scanners by adopting an odd form of behavior. We do this by moving out to sea, then flying in small triangles, turning left, left, and left again, each leg of the triangle being of a duration of 2 minutes flying time. In this way, we hope to attract attention. When we have been spotted, the aircraft controller is informed and he diverts another aircraft to find us. This other aircraft, of course, has a radio. When discovered by the rescue aircraft, we formate on him and he brings us down through the cloud or fog to a safe landing. Yes, it was the last attempt to save one's life. I recall the details better now. The rescue aircraft which would lead you back to a safe landing, flying wingtip to wingtip, was called the Shepherd. I glanced at my watch. 51 minutes airborne, about 30 minutes left of fuel. Then I looked at the fuel gauge and saw that I'd lost it along with the rest when the fuse blew. I had an icy moment until I remembered the worry button, which I could press to get an approximate reading. The fuel gauge read 1/3 full. Knowing myself to be still short of the Norfolk coast, and flying level at 10,000 feet in the moonlight, I pulled the Vampire into a left-hand turn and began the first leg of my first triangle. After 2 minutes, I pulled left again. Below me, the fog reached back as far as I could see, and ahead of me, toward Norfolk, it was the same. 10 minutes went by, nearly 2 complete triangles, I'd not prayed, not really prayed, for many years, and the habit came hard. Lord, please get me out of this bloody mess. No, you mustn't talk like that to him. Our Father which art in heaven, oh, he'd heard that 1,000 times. Would be hearing it another 1,000 times tonight. What do you say to him when you want help? Please, God, make somebody notice me up here. Please, make someone see me flying in triangles and send up a shepherd to help me down to a safe landing. Please help me, and I promise... What on earth could I promise him? He had no need of me, and I, who now had need of him, had taken no notice of him for so long he'd probably forgotten all about me. When I'd been airborne for 72 minutes, I knew no one would come. The compass still drifted aimlessly through all the points of the circle, and the other electrical instruments were dead, all their needles frozen at the point where they'd stopped. My altimeter read 7,000 feet, so I dropped 3,000 feet while turning. No matter. The fuel read between 0 and a quarter full, say 10 minutes more flying time. I felt the rage of despair welling up. I began screaming into the dead microphone. You stupid bastards, why don't you look at your radar screens? Why can't somebody see me up here? All so damn drunk you can't do your jobs properly. Oh, God, why won't somebody listen to me? By then, the anger had subsided, and I'd taken to blubbering like a baby from the sheer helplessness of it all. 5 minutes later, I knew, without any doubt of it, that I was going to die that night. Strangely, I wasn't even afraid anymore, just enormously sad. Sad for all the things I would never do, the places I would never see, the people I would never greet again. It's a bad thing, a sad thing, to die at 20 years of age with your life unlived. And the worst thing of all is not the fact of dying, but the fact of all the things never done. Out through the perspex, I could see that the moon was setting, hovering above the horizon of thick white fog. In another 2 minutes, the night sky would be plunged into total darkness. And a few minutes later, I would have to bail out of a dying aircraft before it flicked over on its last dive into the North Sea. An hour later, I would be dead also, bobbing around in the water, a bright yellow May west supporting a stiff, frozen body. I dropped the left wing of the Vampire toward the moon to bring the aircraft onto the final leg of the last triangle. Down below the wingtip, against the sheen of the fog bank, up moon of me, a black shadow crossed the whiteness. For a second I thought it was my own shadow, but with the moon up there, my own shadow would be behind me. It was another aircraft, low against the fog bank, keeping station with me through my turn a mile down through the sky toward the fog. The other aircraft being below me, I kept turning, wing down to keep it in sight. The other aircraft also kept turning, until the two of us had done one complete circle. Only then did I realize why it was so far below me, why he did not climb to my height and take up station on my wingtip. He was flying slower than I. He could not keep up if he tried to fly beside me. Trying hard not to believe he was just another aircraft moving on his way, about to disappear forever into the fog bank, I eased the throttle back and began to slip down toward him. He kept turning. So did I. At 5,000 feet, I knew I was still going too fast for him. I could not reduce power anymore for fear of stalling the Vampire and plunging down out of control. To slow up even more, I put out the air brakes. The Vampire shuddered as the brakes swung into the slipstream, slowing the Vampire down to 280 knots. And then he came up toward me, swinging in toward my left-hand wingtip.